So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to welcome all of you in our regular meeting. First of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Governor of the Czech National Bank, Mr. Miroslav Singer, and also Director of the Monetary Policy Department, Mr. Tomáš Holub, who is after that going to make the first opening presentation. And I would like also welcome delegation from National Bank of Ukraine, leading by Valeria Gontareva. And for the beginning, I would like to ask Mr. Holub to make the opening presentation. So, Mr. Holub, the floor is yours.
Perhaps if I can ask, if I can add something, our colleagues from Ukraine are here, among others, to see firsthand the communication issue of monetary policy and other issues. So they are not going to substitute us in terms of Q&A part of the session.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to present you our new forecast and how we assess the situation of the Czech economy almost 2 years after the Czech National Bank started to use the exchange rate as a further monetary policy instrument, and of course the forecast how we believe the economy is going to develop in the next 2 years going forward. As usual, my presentation will be divided into 3 blocks. First, I'll describe the key assumptions of the forecast, then I will go to the forecast itself, and in the end I will make a brief comparison of the current new forecast with the previous one that we published in August. So starting with the assumptions, of course the forecast as always is crucially affected by our assumptions about the external economic environment. The forecast assumes, based on the consensus forecast outlook, that the GDP growth in effective trade-weighted euro area will fluctuate around 2% over the entire forecast horizon. So foreign economic developments will be relatively supportive of the Czech economic growth. But at the same time, we'll continue to import some anti-inflationary pressures from the euro area in the next a few quarters, because in the new forecast we assume that producer prices in the euro area are not going to return to positive annual growth rates before the second half of next year, which is a relatively significant downward revision compared to the previous forecast, and at the same time we've done a slight downward adjustment of this trajectory compared to the purely mechanical adoption of the consensus forecast, because we came to the conclusion that the consensus may not yet fully reflect the recent drop in oil prices. Of course, the very muted price developments in the euro area are affecting the monetary policy of European Central Bank and its future outlook. So for the moment, the path of the 3M Euribor that we assume in our forecast is close to zero, basically until the end of 2017. And at the same time, the expectations of further relaxation in the euro area monetary policy contribute to expected slight further depreciation of euro against the US dollar in the next year, even though to a slightly lesser extent than in the previous outlook. As regards domestic fiscal policy, our estimate of this year's government budget deficit is, the government sector deficit, the broader definition, it's 1.3% of GDP, which is lower than last year due to two factors. First, the accelerating economic growth this year, which is really very robust, and at the same time, dissipation of some one-off effects which increased the deficit last year. However, looking at the structural budget deficit, we actually expect some easing from minus 0.6% of GDP last year to minus 1% this year. Going forward in 2016 and 2017, we expect further declines in the headline deficit, almost to zero in 2017, while the structural deficit will slightly decline only in 2017. Speaking about how the fiscal policy is going to affect the economy, we expect a relatively major positive fiscal impulse of 0.6 percentage points this year, mainly related to the accelerated drawdown of EU money from the previous programming period, and then a slightly negative fiscal impulse of minus 0.3 in 2016, as the projects from the new programming period will be starting only very gradually. And as a result, we expect that public investment will increase quite steeply this year, but then decline in 2016, at least the part which is financed by EU money. As regards the monetary policy, the forecast assumes that market interest rates will be flat at their current very low level until the end of 2016, and the same is true as regards the use of exchange rate as a monetary policy instrument. And then in 2017, the forecast is consistent with an increase in domestic market interest rates and a gradual appreciation of the currency, even though we don't expect any kind of sudden jump of the exchange rate to the pre-intervention level, which we assess as slightly overvalued, partly because the depreciation of the currencies in the meantime passing into the nominal variables, and more recently we've eventually seen also some pass-through into the nominal wages in the business sector, as I will describe later on. Now the forecast itself. To summarize, we are still in a situation of very low inflation, both measured by headline inflation and monetary policy relevant inflation, but the forecast expects that inflation will increase and reach the 2% target at the monetary policy horizon, and then in 2017 these two measures of inflation will be slightly above the target. The domestic economy will continue to grow, and nominal wages in the private sector will accelerate, which will provide some stimulus to the growth of prices from the domestic economy. On the other hand, import prices are at the moment still quite strongly anti-inflationary, and this effect will fully fade away only in mid-2016. As regards the GDP forecast for this year, we expect 4.7% because of a combination of several factors. Of course, still quite easy monetary conditions, accelerating demand from the euro area, low oil prices, and the fiscal stimulus, mainly from the EU funds. But then two of these factors, the EU money and the drop in oil prices, will fade away in 2016, and we expect the GDP growth to slow down slightly below or just below 3%, but this will still be enough for the employment growth to continue, albeit at a slightly slower pace than at the moment, and at the same time for the nominal wage growth to accelerate in the business sector. So this is the graphical illustration of our inflation forecast. In the third quarter of this year, inflation dropped to 0.4%. The slight decline that you can see in the chart was a reflection of a slowdown in food price growth and a further deepening of the fall in fuel prices, reflecting the global oil price developments. But as you can see, we expect inflation to start increasing again from the fourth quarter of this year and to reach the 2% target at the policy horizon. And then I wouldn't say fluctuate, but maybe stay slightly above 2% until the end of 2017. And basically the same is true also for the monetary policy relevant inflation, which takes out or subtracts the primary effects of indirect tax changes. The outlook is only marginally lower than for headline inflation because the forecast assumes further increases in tobacco excise duties, but the impact will be just 1 or 2/10 of a percentage point. So overall in 2017, even the monetary policy relevant inflation will be marginally above the target. Looking at the current structure of inflation, the picture is quite similar to what we discussed last time in August. So the main downside effect comes from fuel prices, which even deepened further during the last quarter. While core inflation remains steadily positive, it edged up slightly to 1.2% in September, and importantly, both its two subcomponents are in the positive range. As regards food prices, they temporarily stopped increasing during the third quarter, but the last figures in September suggest that there is a tendency of food prices to start growing slowly again. Going forward, we expect that, on the other hand, administered prices will continue in a slight decline until the end of 2016, which in 2016 will mainly reflect the unassumed decline in natural gas prices for households, following the already observed decline in the commodity price internationally. But of course, the exact timing and depth of this decline is subject to uncertainty. Then in 2017, we expect administered prices to start growing, but at only a very moderate pace, mainly because we expect a further decline in the electricity price. So this will be lowering the overall growth of administered prices. On the other hand, as regards market-determined prices, or what we call net inflation, we expect a gradual speed up to more than 2% in late 2016 and during 2017. And this will more or less reflect an increase in all the three subcomponents of net inflation. So we expect core inflation to go up, we expect food price growth to accelerate, and we expect fuel prices to go from deeply negative to slightly positive growth rates. Here you can see two of the three subcomponents with the largest weight. As you can see, for adjusted inflation, we expect an acceleration above 2% by the end of this year, and core inflation remaining above 2%, slightly above 2% in 2017. This is basically a reflection of the ongoing growth in the domestic economy and expected acceleration in nominal wage growth, and at the same time dissipating effect of the falling import prices, which, as I mentioned, we expect this effect to fade out at around the middle of 2016. As regards the food prices, they slowed down in the third quarter of 2015 to 0.3 only, but we expect the food price growth to accelerate. Initially, there will be some effect of the dry weather this year, which is causing the prices of vegetables, fruit, and some other items to start increasing, something which was already apparent in the September data. But then more fundamentally, in the longer run, there is an assumed increase in the global as well as domestic agricultural commodity prices. And of course, there may also be some effect from the domestic inflationary pressures associated with the ongoing economic growth and wage increases. This is the analytical decomposition of the inflationary factors from our core forecasting model G3. And the upper chart shows that according to our assessment, the domestic economy has already started to exercise some upward impact on the domestic cost and subsequently the consumer price level. But those pressures on the domestic economy have so far been almost fully offset by the anti-inflationary effects of import prices. So imported disinflation has been very strong so far. We expect this imported disinflation to start moderating going forward, but as I mentioned, it will still be on the anti-inflationary side until the middle of 2016, and only from the second half of next year it will temporarily be adding a bit to inflation together with the assumed return of producer prices in the euro area into positive annual growth rates. On the other hand, we expect the upward pressures on prices from the domestic economy to continue, related to a further acceleration in nominal wage growth, which, however, will be at the same time offset by a speed up in labor productivity growth, and to some extent also we expect increases in the prices of capital, which reflects basically the cyclical upswing and better capacity utilization in the economy. As regards the GDP growth rate, it's surprisingly and exceptionally strong this year. As I mentioned, we now expect the full year GDP growth rate to reach 4.7, as the economy is boosted by a combination of several factors that I've already mentioned, including easy monetary policy, EU funds, and the drop in oil prices. As the EU funds will slow and the oil price will stay low but will not decline further according to the forecast assumptions. Also, the economic growth will slow down next year. and on average it will reach 2.8% and then 2.9% in 2017. So a more or less a flat profile of the GDP growth afterwards. As regards the aggregate demand components of this GDP growth projection, we expect quite stable increases in household consumption, 3.2% this year and then close to 3% in 2015-2016, driven mainly by continued growth in real income. And at the same time, we expect continued growth of both exports and imports related to increasing foreign demand, and until 2016 also maintaining of the exchange rate commitment from the CNB side. What will be more volatile is the investment growth projection. It's partly due to the effect of government operations, partly due to the fact that this year we've so far observed rather strong increases in inventories, which we don't expect to continue at the recent pace going forward. Speaking about the subcomponent, the fixed investment, here I have a useful analytical decomposition of the projection, because as I mentioned, it's now quite significantly affected by the EU fund cycle, and on top of that there is a one-off accounting factor related to the lease of supersonic aircraft fighters in late 2015, which then has a base effect in late 2016. So here you can see that fundamentally we expect investment in private sector to continue increasing. It's the positive red bars. What generates the swings? It's the government sector with an important contribution of EU funds, positive contribution this year, which will fade out next year. Here it's actually not just the fixed investment, sorry for the title, there is also visible the contribution of inventories, which is positive this year and more or less neutral for 2016-2017. The ongoing growth of the economic activity is naturally having a positive effect on the labor market. Employment growth converted into full-time equivalent is now close to 2%, driven mainly by increases in the number of employees, while the hours worked per employee declined slightly in the second quarter of this year. We expect the employment growth to continue, but at a slowing pace, which will reflect two factors. First, the GDP growth will slow down compared to the unusually fast pace this year. And second, of course, with further declines in the unemployment rate towards the NAIRU, the equilibrium unemployment rate, labor will become scarcer, and increases in the demand for labor will have a more visible effect on the nominal wage growth than on further employment growth. Here you can see the related expected speed up in the nominal wage growth in the business sector from slightly more than 3% this year to 4.8% next year and slightly more than 5% in 2017. As I mentioned, the growing employment coupled only with a gradual rise in the labor force will lead to a further decline in the general unemployment rate to less than 5%. But the further declines in unemployment will, of course, be less steep than in the recent past, because we are already approaching full employment. And here you can see the interest rate path for 3 months PRIBOR, which is consistent with our new forecast. And here the key thing is that the forecast assumes interest rates to be maintained at a technically zero level until the end of 2016. And the same is true about the expected or the assumed use of exchange rate as a monetary policy instrument. And then consistent with the forecast is an increase in interest rate in 2017. Finally, a brief comparison with the previous forecast. As regards inflation, we lowered the projection for the next few quarters, while for 2017 there is a slight upward revision. The strong economic activity this year has led to higher GDP forecast for 2015, but for the coming 2 years the forecast is virtually unchanged. We increased the nominal wage growth forecast, reflecting the upward surprise compared to our previous forecast in the second quarter of this year, as well as faster economic growth. And we haven't changed the monetary policy assumptions of the forecast at all. So this is the slight downward revision of the inflation forecast for the next few quarters, reflecting lower food prices and larger than forecasted decrease in fuel prices. But these are by their nature temporary factors which will fade out. And moreover, in the more longer term, there is an offsetting effect of more robust economic growth this year and faster nominal wage increases. As regards administered prices, we reduced the forecast on the whole horizon. In 2016, it reflects deeper decline in natural gas prices. In 2017, it's a combination of decreases in several items of the administrative price basket, which are listed on the slide. As regards core inflation, the projection is lower in the near term, reflecting an ongoing and deeper than expected decline in producer prices in the euro area. But what dominates in the longer end of our outlook, it's the faster nominal wage growth and stronger economic activity. While for the food prices, we had a downward forecast error in the third quarter of this year, which we reflected into the forecast, which shifted down. But for the second half of 2016 and 2017, the forecast remains basically unchanged. GDP growth, I already mentioned, much higher in the rest of this year due to the surprising strong number in the second quarter of 2015. We now changed our view on the inventories. In the previous forecast, we assumed that they would decline and correct the increase in 2015, which we previously attributed to one-off factors. Now we move more towards the view that the increase in inventories is largely cyclical, and that there will be not a big offset in the remaining 2 quarters of 2015. But then basically no change in the forecast for 2016-2017. We did only marginal changes to the household consumption profile. On the other hand, higher inventories and to some extent also more pronounced EU fund cycle have led to higher investment growth this year, but then slightly more pronounced slowdown in 2016. As regards the projection of exports and imports, we have reflected currently lower than expected growth rates of both exports and imports, but there is not much change in the second half of 2016 and in 2017. As I mentioned, the exchange rate assumptions of the forecast remain the same as before, while the outlook for euro area effective demand is also basically unchanged. This is the comparison of the nominal wage forecast. It's slightly higher, but almost on the whole forecast horizon, and this reflects first higher than expected numbers in the first half of this year, including some data revisions, but then also the stronger than expected economic activity mainly this year. As regards the interest rate path, it's the changes are only minor for 2017 to the upside, which reflects the slightly higher, slightly stronger cost pressures from the domestic economy, which are, however, being counteracted by a lower outlook for the euro area interest rate in 2017. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I pass the floor back to Mr. Governor or to Marek Zeman. Yeah.
I would like to thank you, Mr. Holub, for the opening presentation. And now is the time for your questions, so please don't forget to switch on your microphones.
And if I may ask, for behalf of all of us, introduce yourself and the institutions you are from. Thanks.
Please.
Dana Hajkovač z Kaspritelna. Good morning. I would like to ask you about the consistency of the development of the monetary policy of interest rates and the exchange rate after the fixing period in the forecast until the end of 2016. You are mentioning that the exchange rate will appreciate moderately after, being freed from the intervention regime, and that this will be driven by interest rate differential, which is obvious. According to the assumption, it's 100 basis points, then renewed convergence, and but one point which I missed is that the initial depreciation of the exchange rate in the start of the intervention regime was much larger than, and it's still would require some adjustment in the exchange rate. The accumulated inflation differential towards the euro area now is still less than 1 percentage point. So I think this is one more factor which will contribute to exchange rate appreciation. So actually what we are supposed to understand about moderate rate of exchange rate appreciation. Thank you so much.
I believe Thomas will start on technical grounds, and then I will present, as usually, knowledge-free and wit-free opinion of policymaker.
Okay, I think I will start with a technical clarification as regards the interest rate differential. The way that our forecasting models work with the outlook of the euro area interest rate is such that they take the outlook that we have from the financial markets, yield curves, and futures pricing at face value only for the coming 6 quarters, while for the farther end of the forecasting horizon, it's a kind of weighted average between the assumptions of the forecast about the Euribor and a kind of tendency of model-based tendency of the interest rates to return to their steady state levels once all the other variables, by which I mean foreign inflation and foreign growth rate, are also back to the assumed equilibrium trends. So implicitly, the forecasting model has a higher outlook for the Euribor than what you can see in the charts, and this means that the interest rate differential, which is behind the gradual appreciation tendency of the currency in 2017, is definitely much less than 100 basis points. Of course, when we get closer to 2017 and we'll see that the ECB is indeed continuing to run a very moderate and very loose monetary policy, even though economic growth in the euro area continues and inflation in the euro area is returning toward 2% target, we'll start to take this at face value, and the outlook of the PRIBOR will then shift down. Of course, the outlook of the PRIBOR also does not take into account any, I would say, monetary policy tactical aspects like the proper sequencing of the steps of abandoning the floor and only subsequently starting to gradually hike rates going forward. This is perhaps something that goes more to the board. We don't incorporate any such strategic considerations into the forecast itself. Concerning what's meant by the word moderate, you know that we temporarily suspended publishing the interest rate path, and as a result I'm not exchange rate path, sorry, as a result I'm not going to tell you any exact number, but you can guess from the fact that we say that it's not an appreciation to the pre-intervention level. You know what the pre-intervention level was, so that gives you some rough idea what we mean by moderate.
Well, if I can ask first, the board had the same questions, so it's rather hypothetical, the future interest rate path after exit. Second, well, for exit, the necessary condition is to get a bit of cumulative differential between inflations. Yeah, or you won't have exit. Yeah. And so far with current outlook for Europe. And well, as before, as a matter of fact, 2013, there's always trade-off. Yeah? More appreciation means less hikes, and vice versa. That was here for always. And my last comment, perhaps in this respect, it's good to point out that, or to repeat what Tomáš said. With return back to using normal tool, meaning interest rate, we will still be committed to control wild swings of exchange rate. That's our experience, and that's our habit. We did it before, and we will keep doing it. So that's also worth to keep in mind. Does it answer your question, or at least exhaust your will to ask us about it?
Yeah, thank you. So, so what I get is that you reminded us that the interest rate path is hypothetical and it's consistent with the forecast, and that the bank board is going to assess it tactically in the context of what is going to happen and what is going to happen also in the euro area.
Well, what you get, you take. Any other questions?
Pavel Sobíšek, Unicredit Bank. All of us analysts have noticed that the communication of the central bank regarding the timing of the exit has changed since last time. On the one hand, we have first observed the word probability. On the other hand, the explicit commitment until the middle of 2016 has been abandoned. So my question is, how much should we read into the letter that there is no explicit commitment now?
Well, first, it's good to read all letters of announcement. And I believe we have something, I know it in Czech, before the sentence with probability, we have something that the probability of exit or the exit before forecast exit, because the exit before the exit is forecast is marginal, meaning we are moving it from present to more distant future, because we had commitment, and we are essentially saying that the chance that we would end up before the forecast is marginal. There is the sentence, and it is there intentionally. So really, go to letters, but read them all. That's my first advice. And second, more substantially, it seemed to us, and that was part of our discussion, that at the same time as we probably would be inclined to move another quarter of year, which is marginal change and doesn't really make too much sense to communicate it. We first time, in a sense, see that there is a sort of like, given the risks of forecasts, we count it as roughly balanced, and that the exit may be there. So we found it very difficult to use the wordings we've been using for 2 years essentially of minimal until. So now we are sort of resorting to a different sentence saying roughly around, and that's a change, and that's a change, and the change is there because we really see the chance that there is going to be an exit in monetary policy horizon. So there was a relatively long discussion behind this change, and from practical point of view, and I believe most of those who read it are not in this criminology analysis of sentence got it very okay. We confirmed what you sort of expected. We are saying that the chance that it will end up in summer next year is essentially marginal, and it will most likely end up around this turn of the years, but it's very difficult at this juncture to be more specific. So we decided to express what we really think, and instead of saying that we will keep it minimal until the end of September, which frankly is something that you knew already. Is this clear? So we are. My point is, from now on, it's more likely that the board may move the exit term, but will be less inclined to use the minimal until formula, because it really sees the chance of exit. If you don't see the chance of exit, it's very easy to use the minimal until formula, because you can just move it and see it's for sure. But now it's. We see that a chance that in the second half of next year, which is still within the term of transmission, the inflation pressures will start build up in a way that they will require tightening of monetary policy, which we didn't see so far.
It's much clearer. Thank you.
Thank you. I have seen Jakub Seidler.
Jakub Seidler, ING Bank. Just comparing today's or November's and August forecast. Both forecasts assume that the euro krona will remain till the end of 2016. We see that oil prices now are supposed to be lower. We also see that food prices are now in the forecast also supposed to be lower. So it actually means that the core inflation are picking up much stronger in the new forecast compared with the August forecast on the monetary policy horizon. So in that perspective, it seems quite surprising that CNB decided to shift a little bit monetary stance during this meeting and not already during August meeting. So if you could please elaborate more about this. Thank you.
Well, first of all, even the previous forecast assumed the exit at the beginning of 2017. So from the forecast point of view, there is no change about this assumption. As regards the core, yes, indeed, if you look at one of my slides, the revision of core inflation, it goes actually slightly down in the next 2 or 3 quarters related to more disinflation from abroad, but then at the longer end of the outlook, it's slide 26. Core inflation is about 0.5 percentage point higher than in the August forecast, and this reflects faster nominal wage growth in the private sector as well as stronger economic activity. So basically, the forecast had to somehow digest that there is more imported disinflation, but a bit more robust growth and cost pressures from the domestic economy. And those two things have somewhat different horizons. The imported anti-inflationary pressures relate mainly to the near term and the next few quarters, while the transmission from the economic growth and wage growth into the economy is more medium term and affects mainly the outlook for 2017. But overall, the changes to the inflation forecast are quite minimal for 2017 because the higher core inflation there is to a large extent offset by lower growth in administered prices. We in the forecast itself, we didn't have any reason to think about changing the assumed timing of the exit.
From the board point of view, the main difference is that we a quarter past there, and we are simply talking about less distant future, and that's also, I must say, it probably relates to what Pavel Sobíšek asked. We've been touching whether we see the risks of forecast as balanced and or whether we see them as a disinflationary still, thanks to mainly to forecast of pickup of PPI in Eurozone. And finally we decided that roughly risks are probably balanced, but I would like to be perfectly understood. We may shift the forecast, or the board may shift the horizon of exit. But given it sees it already, it finds it more comfortable to talk about probability around some term than about guaranteeing something for a reasonable enough from the point of view of normal readers, not you, but normal readers of our communication period. Yeah. So we are essentially saying that very likely till the end of next year, as we see it now, there is not going to be an exit, and roughly around. We find it better now for general communication, not only for you, but for general communication. So this time we are essentially saying definitely we are moving it towards the end of next year or beginning of 2017. Yeah. And this may change, of course, forecast by forecast as always.
Next question, please.
Hello, good morning. My name is Helena Horska from Raiffeisen. You have already mentioned that you see as a board the risk for your forecast as a balanced. But my question is, if you do not see the risk from another monetary policy easing of the central bank, European Central Bank, in months to come for your forecast, but also for your FX strategy?
What's so risky in holding high quality currency and bonds from Eurozone?
I mean, for example, another strong pressure on currency appreciation close to 27, or for your forecast, that means that there can be a risk of another postponement of the end of FX control.
Well, first, monetary policy-wise, easing in Eurozone and more demand in Eurozone consequence to this is good. That's if Eurozone eases more, we can expect all textbook effects of what does it mean on forex, on Eurozone demand, and therefore on demand for our products and so on and so on. Yeah. So. Short-term wise differential, you can talk about differential, but as a matter of the fact, as I see it, on marginal markets that concerns the hot money flows, we already have a negative interest rate. And if the market moves, we will have very likely more negative interest rate given the fiscal outlook and everything else. Yeah. So these things seem to be so far quite balancing themselves. If not, if they want, okay, we can always act. That's the first thing. But long-term wise, yeah, policy horizon wise, ECB easing is good. Yeah. And forex wise, I said it many times, the more the corona gets overbought, the more likely is that everybody will be very, very disappointed and will have a very nice discussion with his risk managers after our exit. That's a fact of direct consequence of the fact that this economy produces something between 5 to 7 billion kron cash flow per year, yeah. Not more. I mean, so that's there, but we will see. I mean, that's something that I just want to remind everybody. So far, it's too soon to speculate on how the market will look like. Definitely, it looked quite overbought after we introduced the floor in 2013. So that can happen again. What else could we?
Thank you. I have seen this question.
Viktor Zeisel, Komerční banka. Well, I'm building up on your answer now. So you mentioned the negative interest rates. Was there any discussion about negative interest rate as we didn't hear it in the statement? And maybe if you look at the ECB statements of Mario Draghi that the lower bound for the ECB moved down. Is there any connection to the CNB's negative interest rates?
Well, I've just said it. We on the markets that concern us, we have negative interest rate. Yeah. On the markets that concern us from this point of view, so we had very probably lower level of discussion than before, but that was the consequence of the fact that it is there.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Marek Dřímal, Komerční banka as well. Regarding the negative rates, I agree that it sort of helps you in defending the floor and so on, in defending against the flow of capital. But isn't that a threat to financial stability as well, to the secondary goal of the Czech National Bank, due to the fact that Czech banking system is heavily dependent on the bond yield curve and so on, and it lowers profitability of the banking system and damages maybe the long-term stability? Thank you.
Well, I do not expect the world to be long enough in this state of affairs to matter it to us. Yeah? That's my gut guess. In terms of financial stability concerns, we have macroprudential tools, and it seems to me that there is always a Goddard rule. Yeah? You can shoot only for that many targets that many of tools you have, and as the central banks get in their mandate, and we all always felt it strongly, I would say, because we supervise the financial sector. Yeah. But as the central banks get these things in their mandates, like financial stability, they must be using more tools to achieve it. Yeah. That's otherwise that's simply impossible. Yeah. And all simulations of monetary policy passes that would prevent the Great Recession are so obviously leading to unrealistically restrictive monetary policy. Taylor rule, if you have a look on what Taylor would imply for Fed rates before, that's so obviously unrealistic assumption of two wild swings. So there is a need to use other tools, and we have them in our toolbox. Saying this, frankly, so far we signal the risk. We have a financial stability report, but to see them as something really imminent or hot, that would be putting things quite far.
So, thank you. The next question, please.
Hello, Mai Duan from Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Mr. Singer, can you elaborate a bit more on the board's discussion recently? Because you're saying that there's a better chance, or there's increasing chance that you think that the exit is more likely in end of 2016. Now that given that we are talking about the likelihood that it has increased, and obviously we are keen to see what is the strategy. I think there will be a lot of options that you've been exploring. Can you give some guidance on what are potential here?
Well, from this sort of tactical exit point of view, we still think that as soon as we announce exit, we will probably wait and see for a while what's going to happen on exchange rate, probably trying to contain some wider moves. And then we will start move to normalization of interest rate, or at least hiking in a practical sense, carefully, of course. That's as much as I can say. And again, read our statement as that we moved the guarantee closer to the year 2000, to the end of 2016. But the problem is that now we see a chance of exit around 31st, 12, 23, 59, 99.
Thank you. Any other questions, please?
Tomáš Holub mentioned in his first answer a term, proper sequence of abandoning the floor. Do you have any set of steps that would be described as a proper sequence of abandoning the floor? I mean, both in the model approach, or if there is any discussion within the board regarding the exit.
I'm not sure if I get what you are asking.
Okay. If the board has any proper sequence of abandoning the floor within their minds. Thank you.
Well, I think the board is what Mr. Governor just mentioned. First, abandoning the floor, then wait how the FX market develops, try to smooth out potentially excessive volatility, and only afterwards start hiking rates gradually. While the forecast doesn't play with these subtleties, also because it's a quarterly forecast, so we don't have individual board meetings there. We have just the quarterly averages, etc. And moreover, it's I think the tactics are more the job of the board than of us as forecasters. So the way that we do the forecast is that we place the exit into the same quarter, both for interest rates and for exchange rate. But in reality, it's most likely to be a sequence. First, abandoning the exchange rate commitment, and only afterwards start hiking the rates.
Well, even with what I've said, that first time we think we may see some exit in forecast. It's quite far from now to do more detailed considerations. Yeah.
Thank you. Once again, please.
Yes, just to follow up on that. Can you comment on the recent intervention of the central bank? I'll give you the data show that in August and September you intervened between around 6 billion euros. If that pace continues, I know that you have been experiencing negative capital before and you've been functioning quite well, but is there any kind of thoughts on the sustainability if it continues at like 4 billion a month, as in August?
This is the way we create the demand.
So, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Lukáš Kovanda, Rocklen. I would like to ask you, to some extent, have easy monetary conditions contributed to this year's growth according to your models? In percentage points, for example. Thank you.
Well, we did a decomposition of the contribution to the economic growth, to the recovery in 2014. But of course, as the recovery becomes more mature and monetary policy is not the only contributor. You have the recovery in foreign demand, you have the EU fiscal stimulus from the EU funds, you have the drop in oil prices. It of course becomes harder and harder to have an exact estimate. It's harder and harder to get a counterfactual of how the economy would have developed if we had not eased monetary conditions 2 years ago. But we believe that it's still having a positive effect, and we have an analysis of the monetary conditions index, which is basically reflecting on how monetary conditions are affecting the real side of the economy, and it still remains well in the easy range. Not just because of the exchange rate, but mainly because also we managed to stabilize inflation expectations at around the target, combined with zero nominal interest rate means that the real interest rate is around -2%. So even the interest rate real monetary conditions remain quite easy. But I don't have an exact number like to say 1 percentage point or 0.7. I think it wouldn't be wise to give such precise quantification at the moment.
Well, we have half-year data. That's a bit of problem for any such exercise as well. I mean, like it's for 2015. You need to get first the end of 2015, and then the statistical office to calculate what the GDP was, and then you can start decomposing. That seemed to me quite obvious.
Thank you. Please.
I'm Tata from Commerce Bank. Just had a question on, I remember the non-tradable services inflation was very key to when the floor or the cap was introduced. A very steady downward trend in that inflation rate was seen as proof that it's just going to go into deflation if nothing is done. How are those sort of core services inflation rates doing here at the moment? I ask because the correlation between wage growth and core inflation seems to have broken down everywhere else in the world. I mean, are we sure that things will turn up?
Yeah, well, you are right that before we introduced the exchange rate commitment, we paid some attention to the fact that non-tradable prices stopped growing at all. For the first time in modern Czech history, we took this as a reflection that really the fundamental disinflation trend was driven by insufficient domestic demand. Since then, what we have seen is that non-tradable prices have started increasing. You can see it at on slide 11, in which you can see that the prices of non-tradables are increasing at about 1.5% a year, and we believe that this is partly a reflection of the revival in domestic demand and some increase in the nominal wage growth in the domestic economy. But it's still relatively low, I agree, but going forward we have the forecast of accelerating core inflation, and I assume that the non-tradable prices will be contributing to this quite significantly.
I would say from higher perspective, if you have a look on orange line on this slide, well, we are not exiting and we are not moving the floor, and it seemed to me that this is what the line suggests there.
So thank you. Any other questions? No?
Well, if there are no questions, it's my well, first I would also like to make one apology. I am here alone because this November is a really crazy month from the point of view of all sort of European gatherings on which my colleagues have to be. So I hope it's okay that I'm alone here. And second, more hopeful announcement is that as usually before Christmas there is a buffet lunch downstairs. So if you want to approach me or each other or just enjoy the lunch, please, you are all invited as every last such meeting of the year.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Governor. Thank you, Tomáš Holub, for his presentation. And as Mr. Governor mentioned, please, I would like to invite you to buffet lunch and see you each other next week. Thank you.